Very good.
So we met once before. Now we met a lot of times, but we met once before in an online stream, and I'm even more happy than at that time to join with Juan Camilo González today, which is really great because last time we were in quite remote places, in fact. And now we have you physically here, which is super nice. One will start a workshop, in fact, with our students at the animation department at ERG next week on Monday. And this will be a 1-week workshop at Projection Room, and then will be followed by several online sessions with the students. And there will be also probably several moments to share as live stream with other students, with the public. We will see what makes sense. But for the moment, this is like the first physical encounter we have also since the very first time we met in Mexico City, like years ago, definitely before COVID. And so I'm super happy to welcome you here, and I think we will have a great time with the students, and it's beautiful that we can work together here. Thanks a lot for coming, and basically my role is only to ask you to present yourself now with all of your big field of practices.
Thanks. Yeah. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Being here in Belgium, it's amazing. I've never been before, and I'm really excited to meet the students, see what they're doing, try to bring them some of the work that I do, and try to work in a very horizontal way. My role as taking lead in this workshop is to learn what the students do, what their interests are, and incorporate some of the artistic practices and methods of working that I've been developing for several years, and see how their work can be placed in this particular place of technology, and understanding another way or an expansive way of documenting life, maybe relating to the world through technology. And I'm very happy to see what they come up with, and hopefully we'll have some interesting results at the end of this whole experience. It's a nice experiment. And I love just being able to connect with other people here. Basically, I'm gonna keep this short, but I want to show you a little bit of what I do, and create a context for what we'll be doing in the workshop. I'm from Colombia. I'm from a place called Manizales in the mountains, where coffee is produced. It's a place hit by violence in a particular way in the context of Colombia. It was a place that seemed like nothing was going on, but very close to a lot of the violence when I was a little child in the late 80s, early 90s. So my connection to it was more familiar, like people I knew, or people were close to me, had some connection with the context of Colombia itself. So growing up, I was in a very conservative society called there in Manizales, and when I moved to Bogota to study visual arts, it was all new to me. Very early on, I knew I wanted to do animation, even though I wasn't so skilled with any artistic practice. I was good with computers. I love to break things apart and understand what was going on inside. I even tried, like, early on, like a little bit of hacking, and I was a gentle hacker. I learned how to get credit card numbers, and then I never dared to buy something with it, so I would buy something that would cost $1 and send it to the owner of the card. So that was my early experience with technology. I was just curious about it. I didn't wanna I wasn't thinking on what to do with that, but I wanted to learn how things worked. Then when I started making like art, I guess, or practicing in it, when I went to school, I really started to get fascinated with drawing, and I started doing things with that. I'm gonna show you the shortest film I've done, just to give you a little bit of an insight of the kind of films that I was doing before relating back to technology. What I'm going to show you here is that I became interested mainly in analog work. This is done on 35 millimeter on film, on celluloid, with just drawings. I had a short time to make this film, 2 months, and this is what came out of it. And then I'm gonna show you how I started to connect this analog stuff and the themes that I was interested in with technology and other things that I will be working on with in the workshop. So here it is. Okay. So that's a film I made in 2009. I was doing my master's degree here, and since I was in school, I was making films mainly about trauma, certain trauma that happened in my family. My father was killed when I was I was 19 years old probably. I was studying arts back then. So I started making things that related to this experience somehow. This was one of them. Mainly, I wanted to investigate things that were happening inside of me that I didn't understand very well, and drawing in a very immediate way, and animation, which is this process, very slow process of kind to repeat this thing that you're getting out in a spontaneous and improvisational way, helped me kind of explore these different areas of this trauma that I was dealing with. And actually I keep making these things, and I think I'm mostly done with dealing with this particular theme, and I am currently working on a film that it's sort of hopefully it is a very optimistic thing to say, hopefully the end of this cycle of work about my father. And it started with the idea of killing him in a more therapeutical way, this psychoanalytical idea that you can kill your father in order to cut these things from you. So I started drawing this image of him dying over and over again, and a film emerged from it. I'm gonna show you in a little bit what it's the current state of that film. That hopefully will be the end of it. And actually, just to connect with this theme, when I finished this was my first film of my master's program. When I finished the master's, I was in the middle of deciding what to do with my life. I started working in a small studio with this guy who made SpongeBob, which could be like a lead to a more commercial side of animation, but it was interesting to work with him, making more independent stuff he was creating. And then I had this encounter with someone saying, "You wanna do this PhD in Singapore?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I go to Singapore." I thought of it like a long residency where you get funded to make stuff. And when I was in that position, I had been working with programming on the side. I did a lot of attempts to work on commercial animation. I really enjoy animating, but I hated dealing with clients and this sort of like work to make money out of. So I started making websites because I didn't care too much for the client to say, "I want this to be green or blue." I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I put Comic Sans and a yellow background on your website. I don't care if that's what you want." And I started learning how to code. And then at this point of my life, I thought there's some similarities between the process of making animation, dealing with something that is inside you and some way you observe the world, and the way that I was creating the systems for just the coding something. It had something essentially equal. It's like these discrete moments in which you try to simulate or try to construct an idea in animation through drawing frame by frame something on pieces of paper, and in the coding system it was these loops that would generate these logics until you see something. And I wanted to explore that, so I went to this PhD with this very broad idea of how do I deal with something that is personal, but working within these systems of code that could help me look at them from a different perspective. So I proposed a project on data visualization, but connecting it to this coding thing. So in the PhD, I basically learned how to program very well. Started looking at data in a way that is not necessarily the same as you would see in the literature constantly. It's more like a practical or a utilitarian thing where you visualize something that explains very well a scientific idea or the experiments you're working on. And I thought the data was like a version of the world that had this privileged perspective. And I think of artists in that way. I think artists are very sensitive, like have these amazing sensors in their body where they can observe the world in a particular way that is very unique. And then the work becomes being able to articulate that in the language you decide to work on. So working with data seemed like, oh, this is a privileged perspective of the world. Through the eyes of the art practices, what can you do with that version of the world? And that's basically what we will be doing in the workshop. We're going to be observing phenomena, like certain things that you can capture with data, and understanding the specific way in which the version manifests, in which the world manifests through the data. So I was looking for ways in which you can get a certain phenomena through data and keep my own background coming from animation and this fascination with the analog kind of work to connect to it. and I started doing. Some of you might have seen this stuff before, but I started doing these exercises with data. For example, this was very specifically just taking data from a memory, which was when I was growing up. There was earthquakes where I lived, and at the same time, when I would go visit my father in Medellin, which was a focus of violence in Colombia, there will be bombs in the city, and the earth will shake. So I had a memory as a child that earthquakes and bombs happen in a very similar way. At least they shook the world in a similar way. So I combined those two sets of data, and this flock of birds animated in pieces of paper, just analog animation, start to fly towards the places in which the earthquakes are happening in Colombia. And when there's a terrorist attack with bombs, they disperse and move around. So each kind of block of year has these two sets of data that scientifically doesn't relate to each other. Earthquakes and terrorist attack have no correlation, but within the art practices, with the permissions we take on how we observe the world, this could be related, and this could be the base to create some artwork. So the way we are going to be working with data is in this way. We have the license to approach it not as a scientific, unique, utilitarian way, but through our own sensibilities coming from the inside. I can show you, for example, this piece, which was the one talking about the different perspectives in which you can approach a certain theme. I was still working with my father's event, so I decided that I was going to make 3 projects trying to investigate the different perspectives in which I could observe data. In this one it is closer to the specific event. This is the place where my father was murdered in Colombia. This is Cartagena in the coast of Colombia, and the death certificate that we got from the police is that he was shot in this neighborhood in Cartagena, and I didn't know where exactly. So a lot of the time I would go into the neighborhood. I've never been to the city itself. Probably I would go and try to walk around this place, but the way I could imagine him dying was visiting this place virtually through Google Maps. So that's what I did here. I would go, you can go to any of the anywhere in the neighborhood and try to walk around. This one, the sound is not working. I think there's a version change of something in the browser, but basically if you get close to the ocean, it would sound louder, and if you get away, it gets lower. So basically this is a very intimate, like very personal thing. So my father was visiting this place for the first time. He didn't know that he'd never visited the ocean. So all my memory of it is that he was visiting the ocean. So this is like, if you get closer to the ocean, I don't know if he ever went to the ocean. So could he go there or not? But at the same time, it has this palpitation, like this going to these blanks and seeing the street. And this is coming from data I recorded from my own heart, reading this document for the first time that my father had written before he passed away. And basically it infuriated me so much. So I had this contradicting memory of this nostalgia of, oh, my father, did he visit the ocean or not? And a profound hate for this man who was a criminal and did a lot of harm in my life. So is this the heart is showing you the street where you can move around and look for the place where he might have died, and in the back, whenever the heart goes down, these drawings I would make of imagining my father dying with a desire and a nostalgia and a lot of confusing sensations when I make these images of I want my father to die, so I would draw him dying all the time. So you would see these two images here in tension between these two. And also I think it has a nostalgic element to it, but also this more aggressive way of drawing in which I would draw my father. I don't know if you guys have questions about this stuff or you want me to continue talking about these things. No pressure. Well, whatever you.
No, please continue.
But I guess what is really interesting for me, and also what you can share. I think what I find really fascinating is this confrontation. Is this confrontation of some much more of some obviously very personal thing that is almost so personal that it's impossible to share actually.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and on the other side the very huge distance that certain tools create, you know, that even are inscribed in a structural sense in certain tools like, of course, Google Earth, but also like these data sets, you know. And I think this confrontation, for me, it's something it's extremely interesting because it points to a sort of weird form of subjectivity that is not subjectivity, you know, that is at the same time extremely subjective, almost personalist and collective, you know,
Right.
Something that is really, that you can neither see or neither unfold properly from the distance, nor you can unfold it properly from proximity. And I think that's I don't know, maybe you can talk about this, and maybe also in relation to what is materiality, you know, when you deal with it. Or
It's really great that comment, because I think that's where I found logic in my research. When I started, I had this very broad idea of data animation. It's kind of like these weird worlds apart. But when I realized that when I was doing animation just in a more pure or traditional way, I was kind of like searching a lot inside, and it could be very subjective, and it was okay to be in that way. But when I work with data, I had to take this out of me and search profoundly, not inside of me, but outside of me. Like this, the data itself speaks about something out there. But I think that keeping this subjective relationship to it allowed for it being explored in ways that are already in data itself. I think when I realized data as a raw material, even in the most properly used scientific way, I'm not saying science is opposite to art. I think that's not a correct association. But so you understand, when you work with data in that particular sense, there is a lot of risk if you use subjectivity, because you think that this is going to compromise what version of the world you present to others when you're describing data. But I think it's already very subjective. That's what I realized. So allowing me to speak subjectively about data sort of gives certain transparency that the world is constructed in the data. It's not the world as a real thing. Reality, this perfect version of the world through data, that's an optimistic view of it. It's already very subjective, so let's try to explore the subjectivity in the data as well. And that in this way we say, hey, I'm telling you about this version of the world through my own perspective, not the perspective, the objective perspective. I'm going to tell you mine.
And also looking at it from the other side, I guess we can also say that, of course, I mean, a lot of our way to memorize already functions through data sets. I mean, it's not that data is just a representation of how we memorize, but it's de facto the realization of memory also. So I think this is maybe also something that in a certain sense, it has been true already with other media. If you look at family photo albums, for example, it's a kind of classical example of a performative, not just representation, but realization of memories through the looking at photographs and stuff.
Right.
But of course, I think we can much more globalize this idea now, where we can say that maybe a large part of our capacity of memorization is actually externalized on these data sets. So there is this paradox situation also that in order to maybe access the most core sort of subjective view on memorization, or even the subject itself, it's not very far reaching to say, okay, yes, let's do that through a data set,
Yeah.
Because in a way we work on the materialities of those memories.
That's very interesting, and I think that speaks to the a general problem I find in the optimism of we're dealing with memory. For example, right now in Colombia we have these specific events of we call it post war or post conflict kind of exercises of. They deal a lot with memory, and there's a lot of effort on how do we treat memory of what happened just recently with all this violence. And mostly the effort is to capture as much data as possible, because that's going to give us this kind of 360 perspective of what happened. But I think that's partially true. I think with the responsibility we have with that is it's mainly how we treat these how we can observe these things, because data is not observable. It's this thing, this entity that can be constructed in many different ways. So yeah, it's a version, it's not a complete version of the memory. It doesn't work exactly like memory. It has a lot of excess, but the way we extract these memories from it, relating it to our own experiences, I think that's the job for the artists and the anthropologists and people that allow themselves to bring their own knowledge of the world into how we represent the data that's there for us. But a lot has been, it's gone. The way physically, the way we work, and there's an interesting book called The User Illusion. He talks about these experiments in which how much data the body receives every second is this massive amount through all our senses, and the actual amount that we use, actually used in the version of the body that we idealize so much, which is our rational version, it's a tiny amount. So millions of bytes will enter our body through our eyes, and we use 6 of those for our rational mind. What happens with the rest of this sensorial experience that we receive from the world and we don't use rationally? They go somewhere. They enter the body somehow, and we discard them in a certain way. What do we do with that? I think it's interesting to think about the world as that. Like, we have a lot of things going on. The data is not the complete version of that. It's just a tiny amount. It's just a little version, and then we have to represent that little version of the world in visualizations, in something, so we can understand them. Because even that little fraction of the world that's capturing data, it's too difficult to understand in a spreadsheet. It's this weird bunch of numbers and words. So my main exercise in the PhD was trying to compromise theoretically this optimistic idea that data has this wonderful version of the world. It's like partial, it's already a representation of the world, and the way we relate to it, it doesn't have to speak objectively of the world. We can also speak subjectively about it. And once we're in that stage, then we start working. And I think artists traditionally throughout history have always have done well in that position. Imagine when photography started. there was the same optimism, like, oh, the objective version of the world in an image. It's like, no, we already created problems around it, philosophically and practically, and now we're in a place where we use photography in interesting ways. Data still in that very early optimistic version. So
we can say when it enters a place of anachronism. Now it's like with Walter Benjamin, this idea of the anachronism as the place where you can actually start to activate things or start to basically develop them as narratives because you are not inside anymore in a certain sense.
Absolutely, yeah, and this is what excites me to work in this field, is the possibility of first constructing the premise and then breaking the rules. And artists are very good at breaking the rules and construct versions of what that is through their own practices. So that's just what we're gonna do here. You make sound. Let's break the rules of data representation with the way you approach sound, drawing, animation, film, wherever it is. I'm excited to do that everywhere I can. So we theorized a lot. Do you have another question?
No, I wanted to propose also that maybe towards the end it's nice to show something more, maybe just to have a last word to that. And
absolutely. Let me show you just a couple of things. In this particular one, I wanted to show you these kind of three perspectives I was exploring in my dissertation. In this one, the first one was directly in where happened the event. In this one is data of homicides. So of course, whenever I hear homicide, I would think of my father, because that's the way he died. So people being killed in Colombia. And when I started exploring the data, I was like, this is massive. It never stops. Every year I choose, there's people dying over and over and over and over again. So the way I built this was I took photographs of my father that appear in the document he wrote. It's a strange document, or also had pictures of him. And these dead people will start to reveal the picture parts of it. Of the different pictures, and they start to fade back to blank. So there's this tension of trying to hide the pictures, and every homicide with this animation reveals part of that thing. So it shows the data, but it also tries to show this image that never really appears completely. And then the third version of it is I had this memory of probably the only relaxing or calm experience with my father. We were in the highest part of Bogota. This is this church, and we will look at the city. And I thought at some point, the city sounds like water, like a river. And it was the most interesting conversation I ever had with my father. For some reason, I remember it very clearly. So I wanted to recreate that scene, but instead of it being the city itself, it's all the violence that happens in Colombia. All the database we have of different violence in Colombia. We see here every person that dies in homicides, in terrorist attacks, whatever it is, appears here as a 1 pixel dot that creates a river, like a drawing of a river. And towards the end of the simulation, the map of Colombia appears very distorted. So every person that ever is registered in the data, it becomes this little river from far away. So it's a very calm image. It can be delicate. It can be a bit even beautiful. But it contains all this mass of tragedies that is shown in Colombia. So I always thought it's sort of like being there. The city itself was a mess. It's chaos. It's loud. It's something. Life with my father was like that. It's like being in the city, messy, loud, violent, and so on. And then the only thing, looking it from far away, it's very calming, even though you know that inside of there something horrible it's going on. So that's how I approach this piece in particular. So you see how I was trying to move far away, but still keeping this subjective and personal experience within the approach on visualizing data. I think we've been long enough. I don't know if you guys want to see the work thing I'm working on right now.
Yeah.
Maybe as a last step,
Sure.
that would be great.
So as I said, this is a film where I started with it kind of connect. It started with the map I showed you, where I would draw my father dying, and it became this thing that where the dead people never die completely. So to animation actually after a while.
then right you go.
All right. Well, that's something I'm planning to finish very soon. Some details to work on. I look forward to seeing some of you in the workshop. I hope to see what you guys do, and then do interesting work throughout our encounter. So thanks again for inviting me. I'll see you soon. And, thanks.
Thanks a lot for your presentation, Juan Camilo. And we're looking forward a lot to that experience and to all the discussions that come up. I think it gives really a nice perspective on the framework of from where you will argue or from where you will.
Thanks. Yeah.
Super. Thanks a lot, and see you also on Monday. Okay.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.